Let's say, so I'm rolling the put because you don't want, so I'm in this scenario, I'm now explaining scenario two. I'm not obviously going to explain scenario one. Why? Because you would have let the option expire worthless, and you would just collect the full premium, and you would have now bought 100 shares, and you bought the price cheaper, and you're actually happy. You're feeling fantastic. But for this, let's say you don't want to own the shares. What you want to do is do the same thing. You want to buy the put back for a debit of $13.75, which is the mark price here. And that will give us a profit of $1,000.95, as you see right here. P&L open of this option, $1,000.95, which is $10.95, because it's the difference between $24.70 minus $13.75 should give you a net credit of $10.95. But however, remember, as I said, our net loss still of the entirety of trades is now $1,200 compared to $2,200.95. So I'll be buying back this position. Then what I'll do is I'll find a put with a premium more than $12 to sell. So in this case, I chose another expiration of $35 of 35 days ahead from now. And I decided to, the great thing is that because as you see, the really awesome thing that our loss has been reducing as time goes on, because the rolling put that I did almost expired worthless, or it at least expired less than what I sold it for, which I was at least able to gain a credit of 50% of what the entire loss is, which means the next option that I have to do has to literally cover the remaining loss, which most of the times, if you look at an expiration more than 30 days, you'll find that something that costs, at least in this share price, will always be out of the money or at the money, which is good because that shows that the option, when it's out of the money, it only has extrinsic. So if the option stays at this level, it will expire worthless. So this put has a premium if you look at the mark of $13.60, which is actually $1.6 credit to our loss, which was $12, remember? So usually if you can't fill it in after a few minutes through then, check again if there's open interest. So that's very important. Every time you're doing cash secured puts, you need to make sure that, again, as I showed before, remember when I showed you guys the vocabulary within the option chain, whatever strategy you're using, you need to make sure that the option has open interest, because that shows that there's people buying and selling. There won't be, why? Because when there's no open interest, no matter if you're buying, if you're selling, your order will never get filled. Why? Because there's not, if you're buying, there's not a seller selling you that option. If you're selling, there's no buyer buying that option from you being the seller. So it's basic common sense. Like if you're selling a put, why would your option get filled if no one's holding the option right now? No one will be buying what you're selling, and you're going to find actually that the bid and ask is going to be pretty far apart. So make sure that there's open interest. Either way, I would choose the next strike closer to in the money and bargain with. So in this case, what I'm saying is that if I find there's no open interest, what I'll find is I'll try to look at the next strike that's closer to in the money. And obviously this next strike that's closer to in the money does have open interest. And I'll bargain with it if if I can't bargain with it and I can't get it filled, then I will just fill it at the bid, right? Again, you only do this with the strike premiums bid more than $12 or the remaining loss you have in the entire trades. So what I'm basically saying here is that if a lot of the strike prices don't have open interest, but you found one that has a few open interest and you can't get it filled at the mark price after so many times, now your only option is to get it filled at the bid. So you need to make sure that the bid price has to be obviously above $12, which you can see if I did get it filled at $405, if this option didn't have open interest, which in this case it does, but if it didn't, I would have to, after a relentless amount of order fillings, if it didn't get filled, then I would have to try to get it filled at the bid price, which in this case is $12.90, which is more than $12. So as you see here, look at now. Look at our purchase. It's actually cheaper, which is awesome. We're entering like the price cheaper and cheaper of what the max loss is. And the broker, of course, is going to block out 20% temporarily if the price doesn't go in the money. So in this case, we sold the third put. And look what happened. It's now been 35 days. So it means it's now at expiration date. And the stock price has stayed above our strike, which makes the option worthless now. As you see, the option now is out of the money at expiration. Remember, the put that we sold was at $400. Look at what the price is at now, $412. This is our strike price. It's above it, which is fantastic. Our option is out of the money at the expiration date, which means the option is literally worthless now. So right now we're at the expiration date, and the option at this point has almost no extrinsic left. Look at this. The only extrinsic left, because it's out of the money, is literally the mark. It has $47. At this point, really, I will let the option expire worthless because it's now very far away from out of the money that it's hard for the price to obviously get in the money. Of course, if you don't want to own the shares, you will have to try to buy it no matter what, especially if you only have 10 minutes until the market closes. And if you really don't see the market will get filled, you have to fill it at the ask. Either way, you will have to fill it at a slight debit, but you're still gonna, like, look at what I'm already making, $13,000. I mean, not $13,000. I'm making $1,300.12. So at this point, still either way, I'll let it expire out of the money. With this, I'll be able to collect the full premium, and I'll be able to collect the full premium the next trading day after it expires. So remember that the buyer never gets assigned if the option expires worthless out of the money, which gives the seller contract a full premium extract from out of the money, since there's not an since there's not an obligated to give the seller the opportunity to sell or short 100 shares of stock, since their strike hasn't met the predefined price today at expiration, which can leave us with having this option expire worthless. So what I basically said was that we all know that if you buy a put and you let it expire out of the money, you won't get assigned 100 shares. So what does that mean? The seller is not obligated to give you 100 shares because you don't want to short the shares, because if the shares didn't expire in the money, there's no point to get assigned. So if there's no point to get assigned, the seller doesn't really have an obligation. That doesn't make any sense, right? That wouldn't make any sense if the seller had to be obligated to get the 100 shares if the buyer doesn't get exercised, or vice versa if you're the buyer, right? So it depends on the buyer, of course. But in this case, I can let it expire because it's out of the money. That's because the buyer's not going to obviously get exercised, which means that I won't be obligated to be assigned 100 shares because it's out of the money. The buyer won't short 100 shares. He won't sell me 100 shares for me to buy at, because he doesn't want to sell at the price it's at right now. Right now it's at $412. Why would he short at $412 if the option is not at $400? Right? That doesn't make any sense. So why? Because he will be entering a loss here. If he shorted it at the strike and if the price is costing $412, he's actually shorting cheaper than what the price is at, which is higher than what it's at. This is very dumb to do. So finally, after this whole process, after handling a previous losing cash secured put, look at the discipline though. This is all discipline. After months from December, we were still able to make a credit of, now, if you didn't want to own the shares, we're actually able to make a credit of $112. You see, we lost initially $2,295, and then our last put that we sold, we collected $1,000, and in this put, we're now going to collect $1,300. Net in total, $1,095 added by $1,312 by 50 cents gives you $2,400, which is much more than what you lost. If you subtract that by $2,200.95, that will give you a net credit that will give you positive $112. You will collect $112 in total. So, after handling a previous losing cash secured put into a winning one and owning the shares after, or in the second scenario where you don't want to own the shares and you just want to cover the whole cost of the lost sold put, this is how it looked like. So I'm going to basically summarize what we did entirely. The first scenario was that, remember, the first put that we sold took in a loss of $22.95. What we did was we opened a new put for the next 35 days for $24.70, which we eventually let it expire entering at the share price of $309.30. But our loss of the first option was $22.95. So net, we would be entering at the stock as if it costed $413.25 for 400 shares, when the current share price was $407. Really, in total, we're able to enter cheaply than initially at first, which is great. Because at first we were going to enter at $427. Now we're able to enter literally $15 less than before, which is still significantly cheaper and intrinsically than before too. So that's the first scenario. If you decided to let it expire worthless, let it expire in the money, and what if holding 100 shares with a cheaper price. The second scenario was that if you didn't want to own the 100 shares anymore, if you didn't want to own 100 shares yet, we closed our first option with a debit of $22.95. Again, over here, it was the same thing, but managed to recover $1,095 from the second trade. And on the third trade, we managed to recover the remaining $1,200, but we ended up actually ending with a credit of $112 because not only were we able to cover the entire loss of remaining of $1,200, but we were able to collect a credit from our third trade of $1,312. So net in total, we made net profit $112. So here's the aftermath, which is really important for you guys to understand, because maybe I explained a lot of material here. Aftermath for cash secured puts. So here's the realistic part. So you should only use cash secured puts only if you have the capital in total to enter the shares without it affecting too much to your net liquidation value. You should only be using max for filling in 1% for filling in one position for any stock investing about 5% of your total account. But even with 5%, you would want to enter your investments by averaging your total position by an interval of 4 or 5. So that means if you enter a great business to eventually own it for 5% in your portfolio, you should be entering each entry for investing in the stock when it first hits the support area technically, and then it's showing a reversal. And then you would want to do a fourth or fifth interval. That means that would be a 0.80%. Why? Because if you enter the stock, if your entire plan is to enter a very great business, and you want to own a great business 5% of what your entire portfolio worth is at, or your entire cash, and your net liquidation, because that's called a net liquidation value. If you have a net liquidation value, if you're looking at a stock, your entire stock purchase in total, what you will have is 5% worth of your net liquidation. But because I never enter 5% at once, I will always have an interval of 4 or 5. So that means every position I'm going to enter a fourth or a fifth of 5%, which a fourth is 0.80% of 5%, which means that for every entry into the stock, you will fill in a position of 0.80% of your whole portfolio or your whole net liquidation value to keep filling that by every time. So the reason why I do this, and the reason why you should do this, is because this doesn't limit you to one entry. That way, if the stock gets cheaper when it's already cheap, because that always happens, you're not losing net. And plus, when you do this, you actually make a better return overall, but averaging in your position as it reaches support. So the way how you should average is whenever the stock is below 15% undervalued, for every 15% drops it does intrinsically, you would want to fill in your position when it falls 30% from 15%. So you should buy again. You should buy again. It can be in the perimeter of 15%. I would say as long as you're using an interval of 12% to 20%. So if you bought the stock at 15% and you bought it back at 27%, that's fine. Because as long as you have an interval between 12% or 20%, of course it's better to have an interval of 15%. But as long as you have it from 12% to 20%, meaning that the max is that if you bought the stock at 20% intrinsically undervalued, and if you bought it again 40% intrinsically undervalued, the difference there is 20%. So that's good. Of course, I never enter any stock when it's overvalued. That makes no sense. You're entering it more expensive than what it's worth. Because when you buy things overvalued, they're worth less than what the price shows, which in the long run can make messy returns. Remember that a stock price always eventually goes to what the company's share price is worth. So if the price is doing great with this, so if the company is doing great with its price appropriate in proportion of what the share price is at, then it's a fair deal. But of course, a margin of safety, which means an undervaluation of intrinsically, is almost all the time is better than entering at a fair price. So what I'm saying there is that I would rather enter a stock that's intrinsically undervalued, which means a margin of safety, than entering it when it's fair price. Why? Because you're entering a bargain. When you're entering something cheaply, the stock price is easier to get to valuation, which can make you a profit easier for that. When you're entering a fair price, if the stock gets cheaper, that's normal because you entered a fair price. But if you bought it at a cheap price and it gets to the cheap price, you will be pretty much possibly even still be making money or be at the same price of what you bought it for compared to entering at a fair price. So now, please do cash secured puts if you really understand how to invest in companies. If you don't understand how to invest in companies, please, after the option course, do the investing course so you can get yourself more ready into what factors in and how to invest. into how to invest, how much to invest in a company, when to invest in a company, and what to invest in even in the first place, and when to exit these companies too. So that's it for this lesson. Again, I covered so much material into this. This is now almost 2 hours, but I want you guys to repeat this because, again, I only recommend you guys if you guys have a significant amount of capital in order to do cash secured puts. If you don't do cash secured puts. Second, if you guys understand a lot about investing, then you can do cash secured puts along with you having capital to do so, where it doesn't affect your net liquidation value. In fact, it affects a very little portion of what your entire net liquidation value is. So only do these strategies if you have these different criteria on, where you have capital and you understand investing. If you don't, guys, I have like an abundant amount of strategies within options where you just need the same as stock trading, where you just need $10,000, even less, which I will show you guys. I've used a risk return management and a sort of price action setups within option trading that you can do as little with the same as in stock trading. The great thing with what I'm showing here in these courses, I'm giving a lot of variety for anyone's financial circumstance. Whether you have a very small portion of capital, whether you have a normal portion of capital, or if you have a big portion where you have $500,000 up to $1 million, you could still do every each, which I love about this because it fits for anyone's personal needs. So that's it for cash secured puts. In the next lesson, we'll then be talking about covered calls.